before we jump into the church context, Eddie Wesley said he would be willing to share an example in his work. And so I'm going to hand off the mic to you. Eddie, would you come up and I'm going to pass these out and have you guys just take one of these. And he's got a procedure sheet and a workflow. Come show us and tell us what you've developed and what you've got going in your work context.
Alrighty. This is, I just grabbed, Jeff asked if I could kind of share a little bit about some of our processes at work. So I work at Children's Hospital. I am responsible for all of our enterprise business applications. So any of the non-clinical side of the house, so recruiting, payroll, benefits, our HR systems, time clocking, all that kind of stuff. So we have processes everywhere, and this is great, just as Jeff is describing, the system. So we have our HCM system, which is where pretty much all of our demographics, all of our personnel records are. And one of the processes that I grabbed here that's being shared is when we go through our annual open enrollment for benefits process. There's one of the shorter ones, because these get quite detailed, is when you want to do what's called an appeals process. So maybe you forgot to submit your open enrollment request, or you did but you forgot a kid, that's always a fun when they forget one of their dependents. So the process for how do we handle that, because it needs to be consistent. Anytime you're dealing with HR, it has to be consistent, more black and white than gray, et cetera. So the process that was defined here was really, it's just taking us through, first and foremost, what is the process? We track everything. We review these annually to make sure they're still accurate for any new systems that may be in place. What's the scope we identify? So what are we actually doing with this? And then really, it's almost like a checklist, see the flow diagram that's printed out is really just a visual tool representing the exact same textual process you have here. So you're going to get the same result following either one. It's just, you throw the visual up there, it's a lot easier to take it in, whereas our personnel are going to be working more from this kind of a checklist. But again, so it's more black and white. We can hand this to, these are going to be, someone running through this process is going to be in a position that's going to see a little bit more of a turnover. So we needed a process that I can hand to someone that's been here in our organization for a year, or if they've been there for 6 weeks. And they can follow this process, and we can get to the same result. The biggest thing, too, is having this as detailed as we can, and breaking out into other processes where necessary, so that we can go through when we look at these annually and try and improve upon them. So I'm a huge fan of automation. System guy, and the fear there is always you're trying to get rid of my job. And we've gotten pretty good, for most folks, to help them understand we're not eliminating your job, we're allowing you to do more of those things that you can't get to. So this allows us to do that. We sit down as a team, we walk through this process, this particular one here, and just say, is this working? Can we make this more efficient? If we're giving someone 5 days to return, let's look at the data. How quickly are they coming back? Are we seeing 15 days? Do we need to adjust that expectation? And just gives us a very clear-cut way of going down line by line and assessing with data and talking to our staff what's working, what's not working, what might be able to work a little bit better. Is there something in our overall application that we could leverage to improve this? Is this very manually intensive? Is this a step that's prone to human error? So just being as detailed as we can so we can assess it in that sense and then make those improvements and review those the following year. So
Super helpful for a real-life practical example and the benefits that it has. Thanks, Eddie, for sharing that. And I know there might be somebody who's thinking, yeah, that's great for a business, but the church, don't turn church into corporation. I've heard and felt at times that sentiment. And I've heard people, especially in growing churches, express that, like, everything here is becoming so corporate. So I want to ask the question, like, why apply systems and process thinking to a church context? And so I'm going to ask the question, how do we know God must be into systems? Anybody want to take a swing at that? How do we know God is passionate about this? Well, let's look at what he's made. Let's look at the solar, Let's look at how we measure time. Let's think about the human body. What are some of the systems that make up a human body? Respiratory, circulatory, nervous. There's a bunch of them. Skeletal. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of these different systems. And we need them all. And they're all working together. And when they don't work together, we feel it. Or we don't continue to operate. And the systems are humming without us even realizing it. They're operating under the surface. That's what a healthy, effective organization / church looks like. So where in the New Testament do we get hints of systems? And I'll even give you, where do we get descriptions of the church that hint at systems? Anybody have an idea? The book of Acts somewhere? What were you saying, Caleb?
Same thing.
Something in the book of Acts? Paul used an analogy and a metaphor, one of his favorite ones for the church.
Calls it the body.
The body. And the body is made up of what?
Many parts.
Many parts. Insert the word systems everywhere where the body speaks of members or parts. And it's surprising how all of a sudden it's like, wow, this really makes sense. Romans 12:4-5. Just as each of us has one body with many or systems, and these systems do not all have the same function, so in Christ we who are many form one body, and each system belongs to all the others. That's our dream and desire for the church, that we would have good systems effectively running under the surface so that we can be our healthiest, thriving, and growing. Now, every churches all look different, but actually they all have very similar systems. So if you go to the next page in your booklet, you see Nelson Searcy has written on this. You see a link to a download. He defines a system as saves you stress, time, energy, and money, an acronym. And he gives these 8 examples of systems in a healthy church. The weekend worship service, system. That involves multiple processes, a planning process, an implementation process, an evaluation process. He talks about the outreach or evangelism system. That's how people are attracted to the church. The assimilation system, that's another process. How the process by which people go from their first visit to becoming fully developed members. There's usually a small groups system, how we fill and reproduce small groups in the church. Volunteer systems and stewardship systems and leadership systems and strategic systems. This has been very helpful for me as a leader at LifeSpring to begin to evaluate where do we have struggles or weakness or inefficiencies or disconnectedness between our systems. And we're going to keep going after this and working on this. I grabbed a printout. We're going to do a little exercise together, identifying which of these real-life church scenarios involve a need for a process. So we're going to shift over into processes here. We've got a bunch of different possible scenarios, and we'll just do all of us participating at the same time. There's also a column here for policies. We aren't focused on policy development now, but that's another huge piece. Instead of wasting time reevaluating every situation, policies help you save time by establishing through one case study principles that will guide you for the future. But let's just take this new person arriving at church. Is that a scenario that would benefit from a clear written process? Let's focus on process, not policy. What do you guys think?
Yes.
I'm seeing some nods. That would be a helpful one. Okay. And I hope there's some pushback along the way. We'll see. A family advises that they're leaving the church. Is that one that would benefit from a process?
Yes.
Okay, I'm seeing more yeses. Someone wants to join a Bible study group. Yay. Another one, yeah, they have a clear process of what they do, where they go. A Bible study group is bursting at the seams. I'm looking at Doug, his eyes are glimmering. We love this problem, and we have a process. It's actually in our small group leaders manual, where we talk about how to multiply. There's no toilet paper in the bathroom.
That's a failed process.
That's a failed process. Financial giving isn't keeping up with the budget. We don't have a process for what to do in that scenario. We would handle it as a case by case, but having a clear process on that would be really helpful. That'd be a great one. An event was heavily promoted, but the turnout was disappointing. Would that scenario benefit from a process? A follow-up evaluation process. You got it. You got it. Hint, hint, every single one of these is one. But skim ahead and look. Can you see, does anybody want to push back on any of these and not just acquiesce to me saying they all would benefit from a clear written process? I'm seeing some heads nodding no. If you begin to think about it like this, every single one of these scenarios is a repeating or potentially repeating scenario. And having a clear process for how to handle it would save time, stress, and potentially money. So I don't want to take much longer to belabor this. I wanted to make sure we carve out lots of practical time to begin to think about the systems that are in our area of influence and processes that would be helpful to flesh out. I do have a packet of examples from LifeSpring of some of our existing processes. Nick, would you pass those out? We're not going to go through all of these, and some of them only include the first 2 pages of processes. Some of these would benefit from an evaluation, as Eddie said, bringing the team together and looking at the steps and saying, where are there gaps? Where are people tripping? Is this the right amount of time between each step and that sort of thing? So I will just quickly scroll through, and I apologize, the back page. If you're watching this online, you've got links, so you're cool. But if you're flipping through the pages, the first one, these were printed from our leaders webpage. So for whatever reason, it didn't print quite right. This is our event scheduling process. You can find this on the LS to just map it out. And it helped us to communicate to people, here's what the process looks like. So you see on page 10, there's contact your team, dream with your team on page 11. Number 4, submit the proposal and worksheet, and then it tells you what happens next. We, on the teaching team, have a sermon prep and delivery process. Sermons are something that are delivered every weekend. And there was a point at which when we were just, we could save a lot of time. Let's just flesh this out, put it in writing, and then communicate it. We can all reference it back. And so here's an example of a prep and delivery process. And some of these aren't as linear and formal a process. Some of them, like Eddie said, they function like checklists for us. Some of these do. We have a graphic design process. And what we find is, and we're still trying to fully implement it, but when we follow this, it saves everyone stress. There aren't the last minute scrambles. And I know that the head of our creative team right now is really becoming diligent to work ahead and nail down dates so that we don't create the pressure cooker that has burned out many a volunteer in the past. We have a process in our tech team on page 17 of how to upload digging deeper questions to the website. This actually really helps with recruiting because we don't have to take a ton of time. There is a training process where you model it, you sit down with someone, you do it together, you let them do it while you're watching, but you've got this document right beside you, and it just speeds the process so that 2 weeks later, if they have a question, they just refer to the written process. We have one on page 19, how to create a YouVersion event for a worship service and then update the app with it. We do it every week, and it took time to write this, but it saved so much time. This one I kind of like because it includes pictures. And so the person using this who's training somebody else have the pictures for reference. A very detailed, on page 21, slide prep reference guide that a lot of time has gone into the detailed steps. You can see just a couple pages of that. Caleb has provided for us to look at on page 23 a sort of a glimpse of their worship team application and onboarding process. He's got a couple pages. I thought this was really helpful to include. 23 and 24 is just the intro to the vision and the values of the worship community. But look at page 25. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Super clear, super straightforward. Everyone goes through the same process. Caleb, has that helped your process, your team and the building? And it's really cool. I'm just going to plug, it's helped you develop more leaders because you put different people in charge of walking through this or steps of this with different individuals. Then I included an old one from a couple years ago that's more mapped like a flow chart. Some of these are mapped out in just narrative. Some of these are mapped out, and this was our old outreach strategy, or you could say assimilation process. They did something similar where people plugged in through different events. So I wanted to just give you guys a big bunch of examples, but where we want to spend our remaining 25 minutes is giving you time now. So I'm going to split this time between solo and group work. So on the last page of your workbooks, there are some questions there. What are the most important systems for your work or ministry? So everybody in here has influence. You have a work context, and you're involved in some sort of ministry and some sort of leadership. So here are some examples: outreach, connection, service, finance, leadership, planning, facility, data management. The fact is we have a church management system, the hub, but not all of our ministries are tapping into that system. So identify first, right now, on your piece of paper where you've got a little bit of room, try to write down what some of the different systems are that are important for your area of leadership, for your area of ministry. And then we're going to have you identify some processes that may not be in existence that would be beneficial to build. Okay, so with the 13 minutes that we have left tonight, I want to dial in now and get practical. Use those Post-it notes. I want every one of you to pick a process and the steps. And Eddie has shared with us an example of a flow chart. Oftentimes, when people do flow charts, you can look online, Lucidchart, and there's all kinds of software applications that will provide services, but Post-it notes work too. You can take a picture and then turn it into a written step. Go ahead and pick a process. One of the most important processes that would be helpful to flesh out for the purpose of saving time, stress, potentially money, and reproducing leaders. Part of having a written process that makes it beneficial is it's such a helpful training tool when you're training an apprentice. So, and that's actually something we'll talk about next session: reproduction, multiplication. So pick one. And some of the questions you might ask is, well, what happens first? Who's the first point of contact, or who initiates? And then who follows up? And then who needs to be consulted, or who has the authority? Who's responsible for ensuring it doesn't get to a crisis point? And then there's a few other questions. What tools? That's like I mentioned Lucidchart. Of course, we have the hub. We have processes there. We've got Google Drive docs. How often will we review it? How will it be communicated? Sometimes the project planning people will put it square, and then they'll turn it diagonal. I don't know if you guys do use a formula. Diagonal ones are decisions that could go in two different directions. So if it's this, this happens in the process. If it's this, it circles back to this. So take a little time now, pick one, take a swing at trying to draw out what the different steps are, and then we'll end by having you share with your little group of 3 which one you picked and just talk through the process. All right, guys, I hate to totally interrupt when it's just getting good. As always, we get to the end of each session. It's like, oh man, I'm just starting to get the ball going. I hope this has been practical, not just theoretically helpful, but practically helpful. I took a picture of a process for sermon preparation and delivery that has never been written out. And there, I believe, could come a time that a church would come to us and say, how do you guys go about doing your sermons, your messages? And it'd be cool if I took those Post-it notes and just put it into print form. Now, there are all kinds of great tools that allow you, even Smart Art. You can use Smart Art in your Google or Word docs. And there are free software. I forget the one I used to develop the outreach process. But frankly, I find you spend so much time tweaking how to use the tool that it bogs you down. Good old Post-it notes, whiteboard, and then turning it into the narrative form, hand drawing it, snapping a picture. Sometimes that can be just as helpful. And then you don't get stuck with, the technicalities of trying to, how do you make the X? I can't make the X's connect, or the arrows connect. So thank you guys for coming, and thank you for caring. Thanks for wanting to develop as leaders. We find that the leaders who come to these sessions are often the leaders who need this the least, because you're hungry, you're teachable. That's what makes you effective, growing leaders. We're proud of you guys. We thank you for being a part of this training session. Let's go do it. Systems and processes.